Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today would be the smartest man in the room, Mr. Michael Becker, but he is on another due diligence assignment for his group over at SBI. So we wish him and his team a lot of luck. Sitting the podcast today, none other than Ricardo Hinojosa. Ricardo is one of the top producing loan officers for Old Capital. He's been with us for a long period of time. He's as smart as they come. When it comes to real estate investing, he's an investor too. And he has done all kinds of loans for investors. And so somebody that you really want to pick his brain and try to maybe work with in the future. So Ricardo Hinojosa, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Ricardo. And so today, we haven't done this in a while, and we're going to start doing a little bit more of this, is going a little bit more in depth and detail with some general partners, some lead investors, somebody that's kind of taken over a deal. They've acquired, they've rehabbed the property. And what we're trying to figure out today in February of 2022, is it still a good market to start investing in? If it's your first deal, or if this may be your 10th deal, should you still invest in the market today? And so we're going to talk with a guest that kind of has a little bit of a background of buying apartments. We're going to kind of figure out what he did before he got into apartments and just kind of pick his brain on how he manages these properties, what he's done. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo, and let's meet our guest today. So Ricardo, please tell us who's behind curtain number one.
Yeah, let's meet our guest today. So our guest today is my good friend, Gourav Goyal, who I've known for several years now. We've worked on 4 or 5 transactions together, and I'm happy to have him on the podcast because he is definitely someone to learn from. You know, I've seen him, again, through several transactions. He's the type of guy that rolls up his sleeve, knows the business, kind of started from day one. I'll let him tell you his story, but came out of the corporate world, got educated, took on these assets, started acquiring assets while he was still working his W-2 job. Again, got the education, put in the work, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about how he recently retired and is now doing multifamily full-time. So, Gourav, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ricardo. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's just jump in. I mean, let's learn a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in multifamily.
Yeah. So I grew up in India and got a bachelor's in engineering and came to the US for my MBA. That's really how I started living here in the US, and went to University of Texas at Austin, got an MBA, and, was ready to start my corporate life in consulting. So I worked for the Big Four and then some smaller consulting firms for about 17 years. And then, like Ricardo, you said, I retired last year. But my multifamily journey started back in 2016, November, when a fellow colleague got me introduced to a networking group that I was fascinated about, but I didn't know much about real estate. And what drew me to real estate was it was real assets. It was a possibility of life beyond a corporate career. Consulting careers, although they're great, but they do require travel. There is time commitments away from family. So I was looking for something that I could do different. And so 5 years ago, I got into real estate and focused primarily on multifamily as a limited partner initially, just because I was busy in my job and I wanted to just get it started.
Fantastic. I remember meeting you back then, and I remember you really wanted to get in and learn. And I recall some of the first individuals that you invested with or partnered with. I think you really were looking for some mentorship, and you really wanted to learn the business. Talk a little bit about how you first got in. You mentioned the networking group. That was with Lifestyles. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And then you met some folks there. Talk about that, just how important that education and mentorship was to get you going.
It's amazing for someone who didn't know anything about real estate except buying my own home. That was the only extent of my experience being in real estate. So it was a really good experience coming and joining a group like Lifestyles Unlimited that has people from different phases of life, of careers, who come and who are looking for something similar. And, the opportunity in lifestyle that I was presented with, that I took advantage of, was a lot of people who have been in real estate for a few years, know about what it takes to run properties, and then also meet people like you, Ricardo, and others who are the network of people who help you buy properties. So the kind of things I was involved in is just there's a general learning of go through training meetings or networking meetings, but also visit properties and actually see the before and after, the challenges other people had faced, the things that they had learned that would prepare me to maybe someday do it on my own. At least at that point, 5 years ago, I was still just thinking of being as a passive, not thinking I'll have the time to really jump into something as a general partner.
So, Ricardo, tell us a little bit more about Lifestyles Unlimited, the company that has kind of a funny name to it. How big is it? What do they do? And tell us, you're a member of Lifestyles Unlimited, and we have no ownership in them and they have no ownership in us, but we find that they have a compelling story. They've been around you tell us, Ricardo, tell us a little bit more about Lifestyles.
Yeah, they have a very compelling story. And I remember, like myself, like Gourav, when you're wanting to learn the business, you look to, okay, who has a track record? And now there are a lot more educational groups, but 5-10 years ago, there weren't as many. And Lifestyles has always stood out as a probably one of, or not the largest education group across the country. So they're based out of Houston, but they have offices all over Texas and now all over several different markets in the country. Membership wise, I think, what are they up to now? 50,000 members across the US?
I would bet. Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Somewhere in that range. And they're really known for education. They when you join that group, they walk you from day one, step by step, the nuts and bolts of operating a property. They give you opportunities to invest passively in deals. And then, like Gourav, if you have interest in doing a deal on your own, they create a roadmap for you to be able to do that. And they have a really good network, a really good reputation, because they've done it so long and they've been successful for quite a while.
How long have they done it, Ricardo?
30 plus years they've been around.
Wow. And then, Gourav, you got into this probably about 6 years ago that you started to learn. And again, you had only done single family business, and that you thought you saw through the education that maybe down the future, I wanted to become getting into the business. Do you think you could have done this without the help of a mentoring group? Could you have read all the books and watched all the videos and try to educate yourself through your own means?
Absolutely not, actually, because, it's kind of funny. The network you have of people is what informs you. And if you look in the corporate world, it's the typical, hey, 401k, go invest in 401k and put in some stocks and hope the stock market performs well. I didn't even know there was a potential for investing in something like this until a colleague I knew who was a member. And then joining Lifestyles, I got to know a whole new world and build a whole new network. So the simple answer is no. It's just, you live in your own bubble sometimes and you don't see what other people are doing.
Yeah, that's an important point, is that there are a lot of people coming into the multifamily space that are being like lone wolves, that they'll almost be like freelance baseball players. They can swing the bat, but they don't really have an idea how to hit the ball, where to hit the ball. And that's where you have, and again, we have no affiliation with Lifestyles, but we think they do a pretty good job versus trying to do it by yourself and try to watch a bunch of videos on YouTube and go to a couple networking events. I think they do a pretty good job. So let's kind of go into, we've kind of gone through your background. Let's kind of talk a little bit about some deals, Ricardo. I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, so let's talk about that first deal. So you started getting educated in 2016, did some passive investing, and then I think it was 2018 that you went off and you said, hey, let me try to do this. Let me try to take the lead role on one of these deals. It was around 2018, correct?
Yes. So beginning of 2018 is when I started my search. And, we were looking for smaller deals that we could get our arms around and do well. We were lucky enough to find a deal that we closed in June 2018. Bought the property actually from a fellow member of Lifestyle. So that made our takeover job a lot more easier. And that's how our journey started. We bought a 58 unit, 1967 built property in Euless.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that deal. Good location, right in the mid cities. For those of you that are not familiar with DFW, this is, not far from the airport. This is right in the middle between Dallas and Fort Worth, in an area called the mid cities. Give us some highlights of the deal. What did you like about it? Where was the value out in the deal, the rehab, et cetera?
So this deal, the most important thing was this deal was the right size, the right bite size that we wanted to go in. It was also being sold by a fellow owner. So we had a lot of insight into the deal, fellow member, I should say. So a lot of insights into the deal and what it needed to go to the next level. So there was meat on the bone. And the third thing, it was under a rent control and income limit, which was going to expire in the end of 2021. At that point, they basically call it a LURA, which is a land use restrictive agreement. It's basically a tax credit that the IRS and the Department of Housing contract with owners to allow for certain limits on what the rents can be and what the incomes can be of people who live there. But there is some time bound to it. So when we bought the property in 2018, we bought it with the understanding that we would be exiting the LURA in 2021 and going to market rent. And that would also increase the value of the asset.
So with the LURA, it's going to somewhat put a ceiling on your rents, right?
Yes.
For that period of time. When you walked into the deal, where were your rents relative to the ceiling from the LURA? How much room did you have to kind of work with, with that gap?
So on an average, I had about $100 a month across the different unit types to work with when I took over the deal.
Okay. So the nice thing is you had some upside is a plus, but you were capped.
Yes.
Now with the LURA, that cap gets adjusted every year, correct? There's some slight adjustments.
Yes. So they do allow based on median income and market some adjustment, but it only happens once a year. So we were constrained a little bit at what point we could increase rents and to the limits we could increase rents.
Okay. So that's one thing to watch out. What else in terms of the LURA? This was your first deal. So not only was it your first deal, but then you're layering on the complexities of a LURA. Anything else that people should look out for when it comes to LURAs?
And was there reporting questions?
Yes.
Did you have to report people's income to somebody?
Yeah, so TDHCA is the one that we report to. TDHCA is Texas Department of Housing and Compliance, and they are the people we report to. So while there was an opportunity, LURA does add a lot of responsibility to an owner. So it was definitely for the first time a lot to take in, but knowing the seller and also having a great team around us made us comfortable to go through that. So from a reporting perspective, Paul, there is monthly and annual reporting. On a month basis, you have to report income and occupancy. There is annual reporting. There is certain limits on how long an apartment can actually remain empty. So there is a lot of restriction that comes with a LURA property that honestly can actually be expensive. And if you don't keep your eye on the ball, there's a lot of trouble that owners can get into and have gotten into. So definitely it was a little bit daunting, but like I said, we had a great team and we were committed to doing the work that was needed.
In your property management company, you were very selective. I remember having these conversations around, we've got to make sure we have experience, a group that has done this before, that's familiar with the processes, that has the infrastructure in place. Talk about how important property management has been for you.
It was very important. We couldn't select just anyone. We needed someone who had experience with LURA. So we actually kept the same property management company that was managing the property to help with the transition. And since then, actually, we like him so much, we've used them on all our deals. The second is you also need someone who's an expert. So we actually hired a consultant who is a LURA consultant with contacts in TDHCA to make sure that they would keep the paperwork correct, right? Because one thing is you don't want that paperwork to ever be late, to ever be wrong, because the penalties are pretty severe. They range from disbarment from buying any Lura properties to something really, really severe. And you don't want to go there. So that's why we, like I said, we made sure we chose the right property management company, and then we complemented that with a specialized Lura expert.
And there's also an approval process up front during
Yes.
the transaction, correct? That consultant has got to get engaged, and the state of Texas has to approve the new buyer going in, which can sometimes, again, add complexity and delays sometimes.
Absolutely, because the seller is trying, in a contract, you have 60 days typically to purchase a property. And you basically, your time clock starts when you go into contract. So you got to submit applications and information to both your lender and to the Texas Department of Housing. The interesting thing happens is one of them may wait for the other to approve before they move forward. It's a lot of moving parts. So like I said, we did it as our first deal. In a different circumstances, we would not have if we didn't know the seller and we didn't have the right team. But in this case, it all worked out. But it was a lot of sleepless nights to get through a lot of the complexities of this deal.
So the Lura was up at the end of the year. Talk about where your rents are now relative to where you were back then.
Yeah, so we converted the property from a RUBS to an all bills paid. There's reasons for that. That market has a paucity of all bills paid property, and we thought there was an opportunity for us to maximize rents with water conservation. So we went from even if you adjust the all bills paid to remove the water and electric, we are around $1,220 on an average across the three. So we started at $728 when we took over back in 2018 June, and as of January 1st, 2022, our asking rents are $1,222 on an average. So that has been, that was the whole reason why we like this deal. Is the exit of the Lura is where we really unbundle the opportunity or the value of this property.
Ricardo, can you break this down to the bottom shelf for folks that may be looking at a deal that may have this Lura, this land use restriction agreement, how they should look at these deals if they're thinking about getting into one of these transactions?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand the economics of the Lura. Whenever I've seen Lura deals, I think that the first thing I look at, what are the restrictions and what are the rents today? Because that's going to put a cap on whatever value add component there is on the deal, right? So that's important to understand. And then how much time is left on the Lura? Is it a few years like Gourav's, or is there 20 years left? And then making sure that you have a team in place that is familiar with how to manage a Lura, because it really is no joke. I've talked to many property management companies, some won't even deal with them because of the complexity. So make sure that if this is your first Lura deal, you want to have a team in place that understands all the nuances involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those Luras were put on sometimes right around the savings and loan problems back in the late 80s, early 90s, and then they're starting to fall off right now. So just like in Gourav's case, he bought a property that had these low rents, but when the Lura went away or was going to go away because they drop off over a time frame, his rents jumped up significantly, and that was for him down the road to be able to sell it with higher rent. So he bought it at X. The Lura dropped off. Now he's gonna give it to somebody at Y for them to buy, and then they won't have a Lura against the property any longer. So there's no extra things that they have to do. Let's go to the next deal, guys.
Yes. So I want to touch on what, Gourav has been pretty busy over the last, 2021 was a busy year for you. So let's talk about a couple of those deals. You sold a property and then you also acquired an asset. Let's talk about the one you sold, the Colonial Rochelle, which is the deal you acquired in what year?
It was in 2019, June 2019, we closed on that deal. It's a 64 unit in Irving, Texas, another suburb close to the airport. Like those suburbs close to the airport, they seem to stay fairly occupied and have a lot of demand from prospects and residents.
So you ended up holding that one about 3 years. What was the game plan on that? Was that the original game plan? How did things play out relative to the pro forma?
Yeah, so we were planning to keep the property for about 6 years, and our goal was to double the money for all of us at the end of 6 years. We had a step down Freddie Mac loan, which is a prepayment penalty that goes down over time. And we were ready to keep it. We invested a lot of money upfront, almost $500,000 to spruce up the property. And what we found is the rents just kept going up in that area. And in 2021, we talked to our investors and we told them that we could get their 6th-year pro forma in year 2.5.
Yeah.
So they got excited about it and they decided to vote to sell the property, which I thought was a good way to unlock a lot of the value and give the investors an opportunity to get their money back sooner.
So let's talk a little bit more about that transaction. I really do like that deal. And just to put a picture on it, and that property was 64 units, built 1968. It is in a great location of Irving, not too far from a large busy street. It has great view when cars drive by it. And the property that you guys presented back, to the seller after you owned it for a number of years was a great looking property. But let's talk a little bit about, you put a Freddie Mac loan on it. There was a prepayment penalty. Was that a concern a little bit? If you did a step down, you kind of figured out of how much it was going to cost to get out of it. Was that one of the factors that some of the people that were investors in the deal, did they consider that too, about it's not what you earn is what you keep? Did that prepayment penalty play a little bit of a role to sell that property?
Not so much, because even after the prepayment penalty, we were still able to provide the results. And the prepayment penalty was going to go away over a number of years. I believe it was 8 or 9 years. So it wasn't going to go away immediately. Like it wouldn't have changed if we had kept the property for 6 to 12 months. So for us, the decision was, is the value of the property will go up significantly higher, or the prepayment penalty goes on significantly lower. Plus the returns, like I said, was significant enough for us to absorb the prepayment penalty. And it wasn't much. It ended up to be about 4%, which for the loan, and considering other prepayment penalty options that people are facing right now, it's insignificant. So the numbers worked out.
I think the key there,
and
Paul, and maybe what you were alluding to is the decision up front to do step down versus yield maintenance on the front end, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think that was the key thing, because if you would have had yield maintenance on this deal, that absolutely would have eaten into your returns and probably would have changed your decision, right? If you didn't have that step down in place, because that prepay, it wouldn't have been 3 or 4% to 10 to 15%.
Easy.
Yeah, easy.
The interest rates that time were 5%. So yes.
Yeah.
The benefits of having a good loan officer in Ricardo to try to give people options of what to do. Now, that loan probably would have been a great loan because it was a fixed rate over a period of time. If you had not hit your hurdles, you could have stayed in there and continued to cash flow the property and done a great job. But you just saw that why stay in this one where we could X amount our equity that we originally put into it and then buy something maybe larger. And so let's talk a little bit about maybe the next deal.
Yeah. So the big plus is that you sold the deal. And I remember again talking to you about this around, okay, now we've got to find a replacement because doubled everybody's money. There's some capital gains taxes that are going to need to be paid. And the best offset for that is finding another deal. One of the beautiful things about our business, and we can do cost segregation and bonus depreciation and get some offsets from a tax perspective. So you were fortunate enough to find a nice property and closed on it right before the end of the year. Let's talk about how that deal came about. This is a much larger property, 265 units in Fort Worth. Let's talk about Villas of Cantamar.
Yeah, so my first 3 properties were fairly focused on value add, and I was looking for a little bit mixed. There's a few things that happened during COVID, still happening during COVID. One is inflation, and another is availability of materials. So when I thought about what deal I really wanted to get into, I took that into consideration and said, why don't I just get a deal where the major work around the property is done, where we don't have to scamper to get materials or just come up with numbers that due to inflation becomes low by the time we close and we start our work. So we found villas at Cantamar, a 265 unit in Fort Worth. I like that area because it's an area that started off really well back in the 60s, but lately has kind of gone a little bit down. And then there is a lot of interest by the city of Fort Worth to improve it. Plus, it's a great location near downtown Fort Worth and TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. So the location is really good. It's just that particular section of the area has just seen some jobs temporarily go away that caused the area to go into a little bit of disrepair. But anyway, so we bought this property, 265 units last year. There was $4.5 million worth of work done already. So like I said, I just want to get a property where I can focus more on the interior upgrades and operations.
Yeah.
And basically, I found the property through the broker who sold Colony and Rochelle. So that was sort of our agreement when I got in, is to say, hey, if you sell this property, you got to help me find my replacement property. So relationships matter.
Talk about that, Ricardo, because that is something a lot of people miss.
That's huge.
We call it horse trading.
Yeah, it's huge. And
talk a little bit.
It's horse trading. It's building a relationship. And Gourav, you can kind of touch on this, but talk to us about the importance of building the relationships with the broker network and kind of your approach to that and how that's helped, going from one property to the next.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the relationship with everybody. Like, you've been on the mortgage side, so you got to value the relationship people bring to the table, and it helps you get attention. It helps you get them to pick up the phone. It helps you be the person they call first. And unlike single family home market, there's only a few brokers in Dallas-Fort Worth that control all of this huge market, and being nice and then following up and being reliable, and that matters. And for me,
doing what you say you're going to do.
Exactly.
Being a nice guy, somebody that people want to hang out with, grab lunch with, grab a coffee, cup of coffee with. At the end of the day, these brokers want to do business with people they like to do business with. So I think that's such an important part of finding deals, because we get that question all the time, especially from folks that are new to the business. How do I find a deal? It's ultra competitive. You've got to start with the relationships. That's where the deals happen.
And I can add just one more thing that this relationship helped me. So every deal right now is super competitive, as you know, right? It's a lot of money going at it. So you need everyone that you can in your favor, on your side, to win a deal. And with this broker, he basically helped me preempt the process by convincing the seller that I would close before the end of the year. And Ricardo, you helped me close before the end of the year. So I appreciate that. But those kind of things go a long way in helping win deals, those differences where there's a lot of competition.
Yeah. Yeah. He knew that he could count on you. He knew that you were working with us. And we kind of said, hey, we're going to get this deal done. We closed it before Christmas, right? It was before Christmas.
Yeah, it was 17th, so a week before Christmas.
Fantastic. So you had mentioned all of the work that went into this property from, by the seller. I remember walking it with you. It's one of the cleanest. It's an early 70s asset, but you walked it. It truly looked like an 80s built deal. Talk about the work that was done, and then where was the upside in it for you going forward?
So the work, a lot of the exteriors were done. So paint was done, all the wood repairs was taken care of, the lighting, cameras, new mailbox area, parking lot, swimming pool, painting the playground, the landscaping. I mean, a lot of the exterior was pretty much done, and 65% of the interiors were done from their perspective, what they call upgrade. So what we are doing are focusing on mechanical. So the water heater, what we found is the boilers in these old properties tend to go out at the worst possible time. And one of the challenges with boilers is people want hot water, especially in the winter, and these boilers are not instantaneously replaceable. Things that I've learned the hard way. Yeah. So I always, if I see a boiler that's old, it's going out. So I'm replacing the boilers. This is a chiller property, and it's an older chiller that had some issues in the summer. So instead of band-aiding the problem, I want to just replace the chiller. So I'm now looking at chiller options with 5-year warranty on parts and labor, worry-free worry-free for our residents, worry-free for me. I get some benefits of a better, more efficient chiller. And obviously, I'm going to continue the upgrades for the remaining units. There's a few smaller projects, such as adding benches and carports to enhance income and give options to our residents. But like I said, most of the work has been done. It's an operation story, and it's some upgrade story. We'll be doing.
Yeah, one of the nice things about that deal that stood out to me was seeing the progression as you got under contract. They had just gone under the rehab, and there was a lot of turning the rent roll. So I remember every month financials would come in, and it just kept getting better and better and better, which from a lending perspective, we love to see. Just a nice, beautiful uptrend on the rental income. Really, just a great transition. And it was great to see that upside that, as you took it over, you were going to continue that. And it sounds like it's been going really, really nicely for you. Let's talk about what we did on the debt, because I think this is a little bit unique relative to what we're seeing across the market. So Paul, Mike, and James, they've talked a lot about the amount of bridge debt that we've been doing. I would say right now, what do we do? 80 to 90% of the deals that we see are going bridge because they don't underwrite very well for Fannie or Freddie. Well, this is one that did underwrite. We had some debt service coverage going in. And fortunately, we were able to do agency financing on this at good leverage. We ended up in the mid 70s. Gaurav, let's talk a little bit about that and what the benefits were for you. Being able to go in day one with agency. We did a Freddie floater with an easy exit. But let's talk about some of those nuances.
Yeah. So I'll just add one thing before I go there. The Freddie team inspected the property yesterday, just so you know, and they said, super clean deal.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So we got the lenders saying thumbs up too. I wasn't there, but my manager told me I keep a little bit of space. I don't want to influence them. But they told the manager, this is such a clean deal. So clean property. So we were lucky enough, and thanks Ricardo for finding the different options for us, that this would underwrite really well with Freddie. And what this gives us is super, super low rate and great terms. And by low rate, I mean, I've never seen this rate, but it's a floating rate of 2.55 plus SOFR. And I know
2.55, Paul.
Yeah, that's pretty darn good.
That's beautiful.
So what does that really mean? I mean, what's the all-in rate? So 2.55 plus the index, and the index is...
Yeah, I think we have is it a 5 or 10 bip floor? I think it might be
5. It's 5 right now.
5 bip, right? So he's right at 260.
So the actual interest rate that Gourav is paying on that opportunity is 2.6%. Now that is an adjustable rate, and it will float to whatever the SOFR is, plus that 255. The 255 is the fixed rate portion of the interest rate. SOFR, I think, is a pretty conservative index, and I think that he's going to do well over the period of time. But what I think that maybe you want to talk about, Ricardo, too, is that Gourav has done such a good job of going in and acquiring the properties, fixing it up. And this one that we talked about a little bit in Irving that I like so much, he had a significant prepayment penalty on the deal. Well, tell me what the easy exit penalty would be with this Freddie floater. And again, why is that so important to kind of make the decision up front and match what your game plan is when you go to sell the property, Ricardo?
No, that's huge. And the biggest benefit here is the flexibility. So I think on this one, we have a 12-month lockout, but then after 12 months, it's a 1% prepay. So although it's a 10-year term with 4 years of interest only, so you get the benefits all the way around, right? So you've got a low rate. You have the flexibility to hold it longer term if you like, but it's going to be a 1% exit.
That's probably as low as you're going to get on a commercial loan. Remember, on residential lending, there's really not a prepayment penalty, but when you talk about commercial loans, there's going to be some type of a prepayment penalty, whether it's a large yield maintenance penalty, and that's really to keep you in that loan for a long period of time, that if you do decide to sell or refinance, there's going to be a penalty, a large penalty. The step down prepayment penalty was like 3%, 2%, 1%, kind of steps down like 1% every year. And then on this type of loan, which is an adjustable rate, it's not a fixed rate, but there's a 1% exit. So if you decide on year 3 or 4 that you want to sell this property, you're going to pay 1% on the unpaid balance of the loan. So that if your deal goes up by 10, 15, 11, whatever that number is on what you're going to get on your equity, that's a reasonable number to pay to get out of a loan. Again, if you don't want to get out of a loan, then you don't have to pay the prepayment penalty. But I think in that one, you also had 4 years of interest only too. And what type of a benefit does that have when you have 4 years of interest only, Gourav?
Tremendous, Paul, because even though this is not a huge value add and it's cash flowing day one, Ricardo tells me the importance of having that. It's a nice comfort level to know that the property will cash flow. But having a 4 years interest only helps us, and the 10-year term helps us manage any changes in the real estate environment in the future, right? We think there's not going to be any change. I think the real estate market in Dallas-Fort Worth is really strong, and that area is going to stay strong. But at the same time, having the flexibility, the 4 years IO, it also gives our investors a higher distribution because we are only paying the interest and not the principal for the first 4 years. So it definitely helps on both sides.
Okay, wrapping this up, Ricardo and Gourav, what if you, and I'll ask this to Ricardo too, advice to someone starting out in the business? What you know now is tremendous versus the time that you just got into it, and that you were able to be mentored and educated through lifestyles and this platform to do multifamily. But any advice to somebody starting out in the business? Again, this is for Ricardo and Gourav.
Gourav, I'll let you go first.
It's so much. And the education is just a start. It's the experience that you have on the ground. And I've taken that experience onto my next properties. The lessons I've learned through mistakes I've done, the lessons I've learned through different options I had to choose from, and the results of those options. So definitely I feel a lot better prepared going into a deal, both from a underwriting perspective and also from a takeover perspective. And when we are faced with issues, that's one of the things that I feel. And I think for someone who's going in, that's what they need to be focused on. That this is a lot of learning. It's a lot of fun, but a lot of learning. But it is a lot of unexpected, tough situations too that you have to work through and lean on your team or just have to figure out yourself. So as long as you're happy for the ride and it's going to be ups and downs and you're open to learning, it's a great place to be in.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I think finding the right team, finding the right mentors, and being ready to roll up your sleeves and put some work in. It's absolutely doable. Anyone can do it, but it's not easy. Gourav is responsible for this last deal, a $27, $30 million project, responsible for a lot of equity from a lot of people that are counting on him to deliver. So it's a great business. Go out, get ready to, again, roll up your sleeves, work hard, find the right people, but it's absolutely doable.
Longer term goals, Gourav, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Owning 5,000 doors, 10,000 doors, or 100 more doors?
I think option C. I didn't get into this to build a huge business of thousands of doors. That was not my intention and has not changed. I do want to have a few more properties because it's fun to do, really. I enjoy it. It's something to do. I want to focus more a little bit on the community side as well, help the community improve around the property, in the property. So that's probably going to be more of my focus for the next 5 years.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic. And talk a little bit about, because I know this is important to you, Gourav, so I want to make sure we mention it, kind of what you're doing around the community, specifically at villas. I know you not only wanted to add value to your investors, but you wanted to add value to that community. Talk about some of the work that you're doing there.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's a little bit of a neighborhood that's coming back, and there is a push from City of Fort Worth to invest in that area. There's a councilman who is very, very invested in making that area reach the potential it can. So there is a public-private partnership nonprofit called LVT Rise. The LVT comes from a street near Villas of Cantonment called Las Vegas Trail. And the whole purpose of that nonprofit is to improve the area, to lower the crime, provide an opportunity for good businesses to come, good retail shops to come, to basically transform that area. So I got introduced to it by the broker who was on the board to this organization, whose offices actually are next door to Villas. And since then, I have joined their PID board, which basically helps them spend some of the money they're getting for community improvement. But what that does is it gives me access to be a part of the solution of what the area needs to be. There is no other apartment owner which is on the board, and I get to be part, or at least be the representative and help them in any which way to be a voice for the apartment owners. So right now I'm still in early stages. I joined 3 months ago. I've been in meetings. I've met a lot of people, police department, community, Fort Worth Housing Solutions, code compliance, a mayor's office. So I'm really enjoying being part of that, even though I'm still new to the group. They welcomed me and I'm learning a lot, and I'm trying to give the perspective of an apartment owner and also be open to help them in any which way they need me to help them.
Fantastic.
That's great. Some great information coming from our friend Gourav. And then if you could brag a little bit more about yourself, if people want to get more information on a private conversation, probably with you, Gourav, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you? What's your email address?
Yeah, my email address is my first name, Gourav, V as in Victor, at prosperousbend.com. That's one word. That's the email they can contact me at. I'm happy to share my experiences and what I've done so far.
Yeah, your story is very compelling for a lot of people that may be thinking about it at some period of time, leaving their IT position, leaving their CPA position, leaving their management position, and then going through the training possibly with one of the best companies out there to learn the business, and then also to start the journey to start buying properties and then turning your calendar over to yourself and working through the apartment ownership platform. So super happy for you. We certainly do appreciate the business. Ricardo, any final words?
Thank you so much for joining us, Gourav. It's always good to connect with you. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of people, a lot of listeners learning from some of these experiences. So we appreciate it.
Gourav, thank you very much. Again, Ricardo Hinojosa, we appreciate that. I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.